3 Lives, 3 Worlds, Lotus Steps. Wherever step goes, lotus blooms. Divine Prayer. By Tangqi, English translated using Google. Lotus Step Chapter 31. Book 2. According to Tianbu, in the prehistoric era, if a dragon king asked for his wife with a reverse scale, and if the woman being proposed to marry accepted the dragon scale and stayed with the dragon king that night, then these two people would be certified by heaven and earth. Got married. Although the process is simple, the meaning is no different from the marriage ceremony of the 3 books and 6 rituals of the gods, or the 3 matchmakers and 6 betrothals of the mortal world. Because this is an ancient ceremony, it is solemn and more mysterious and romantic. It is perfect. However, as the princess's natal family, the imperial preceptor had a slightly different view. The imperial preceptor felt that since the princess was a mortal, such a big event as getting married should still be carried out according to mortal etiquette. Although it is currently impossible to find 3 matchmakers and 6 betrothals, it is entirely possible for the bride and groom to stay away from each other for 3 days according to the common rites, and then the groom will marry the bride, and the 2 of them will worship the heaven and earth together, and so on. In the afternoon, the 4 of them sat together to enjoy tea. The imperial master made this immature suggestion at the tea banquet. Unexpectedly, before His Highness the 3rd Prince could peek, the princess spoke up first. "Don't bother yourself," she said. The imperial master noticed that His Highness the 3rd Prince glanced at the princess and then smiled as if he understood something, but said nothing. The imperial master neither understood the reaction of the princess nor the reaction of the 3rd Highness. Although he was a little confused, he still remembered to insist on his opinion. How can this be trouble? After all, the princess is a daughter of a wealthy family, and she can marry. Matters should still be treated with caution. The imperial master earnestly advised, as the saying goes, etiquette cannot be abolished, and all etiquette should be made up for. For example, asking the princess and His Highness to avoid for 3 days actually makes a lot of sense. As for what is going on, the imperial master couldn't explain the reason for the moment, so he stopped talking and turned to give Cheng Yu a heavy dose of medicine. If these gifts are not made up for, in the eyes of mortals, the princess and your highness will not be considered successful at all. We are getting married, so these gifts must be made up for. But Cheng Yu didn't seem to be frightened. He lowered his head and looked at the teacup and thought for a while, then said to the imperial master calmly, "Then it doesn't count as we are already married. When Brother Lian San comes back to see me 7 years later, it's not too late to make up for those false gifts. I can wait." The imperial master was stupid. He was with the 3rd Highness, and he did not deliberately want to create obstacles for the 3rd Highness to get married. It was just because the late emperor treated him well and made it too easy for the 3rd Highness to marry a daughter. It seemed that he felt sorry for the late emperor. Therefore, he had just made this suggestion, but he never thought that in just a few words, he would run away with the wife of His Highness the 3rd Prince. Feeling the cold gaze cast by His Highness the 3rd Highness, the imperial master trembled and hurriedly said, "How can a serious marriage not count?" Haha. The loyal servant Tianbu spoke almost at the same time as the imperial preceptor. How can a good marriage not count? The words he said were the same as those of the imperial preceptor, but they were much more sincere, and compared to the straight man like the imperial preceptor, Tianbu thought more deeply. It is also further away. The princess has obviously accepted His Highness's dragon scale, which means that she and His Highness have become husband and wife, and they are members of our Yuanji palace. If we wait for 7 years to make up for the mortal ceremony, we will be considered the princess and your highness. We are married, but what if the princess becomes pregnant with your little highness during this period? Tianbu's words were so loud that everyone was confused. Even His Highness the 3rd Prince, who was the calmest, paused and stopped making tea. It took Cheng Yu a long time to react. She held on for a while, but couldn't hold on. Her fair and charming face turned crimson little by little. "Sister Tianbu, what are you talking about?" Tianbu pursed his lips and smiled. The imperial preceptor is a Taoist priest with an elm head. Of course, he cannot understand that the princess is unwilling to perform ordinary rituals immediately. This is because His Highness can only stay here for a month before returning to the 9 heavens to receive punishment. The princess wanted to spend more time with His Highness, but of course she couldn't bear the two of them wasting 3 days without being able to see each other. The imperial master didn't understand Fengyu, but Tianbu relied on her ability to know and understand to make a living. Tianbu pursed his lips again and smiled, and said to Qingyu, "But what the imperial master just said is somewhat true. All etiquette is indeed very important to the princess." Then he said to Liansan, "According to my humble opinion, the groom, the bride, does not see this item before her wedding, but it is a very bad habit among ordinary rituals. If not, this item should be omitted. Later, the servants will prepare the dragon and phoenix wedding candles and ask your highness and the princess to make up for the item of worshipping heaven and earth. Even if all the rites are fulfilled, what do you think, your highness?" His Highness handed the princess a small white glazed lamp and asked her opinion in a gentle voice. "What do you think?" The princess pretended to be calm and took the teacup, lowered her head and took a sip, then nodded. "Yes, that's okay." She looked calm, but her face was red. After saying that, he buried his head in drinking tea in a disguised manner. His Highness seemed to find the princess's appearance amusing. A smile appeared in his eyes, and he reached for her cup. "It's just 2 sips of tea. How long do you want to drink it?" The princess glared at His Highness, her face turned even redder, and she grabbed the cup. "I also like to hold it after drinking." Seeing the two of them acting like this, Tianbu winked at the imperial master. However, the imperial master was still in the fog, and he was completely confused. For a moment, I wondered if the dragon clan was really that powerful. The princess had only been with His Highness for a few days, and she was actually worried about getting pregnant with His Highness. For a moment, he thought that it was a reserved and important traditional etiquette for men and women not to see each other before marriage. How could it be a bad habit? He should argue with Tianbu. He didn't notice the look Tianbu gave him at all. Tianbu couldn't bear it any longer and pulled the imperial master over and saluted His Highness the Third Highness. "I will go down with the imperial master to prepare." His Highness the Third nodded. Tianbu grabbed the imperial master's wrist and pulled him away quickly. When the backs of the two disappeared into the distant bamboo building, under the clouds and pine trees, the third hall stood up and changed positions, sitting next to Qingyu, and reached out to touch the girl's blushing cheeks. "Why are you blushing like this?" Qingyu kept his kneeling posture, put his hands on the tea mat, lowered his head and turned the empty cup in his hand, and whispered, "I originally thought Sister Tianbu was a serious person." The young man smiled. "She is indeed a serious person." The girl raised her head angrily. "She's not," she said. She really couldn't tell Tianbu's joke that she would have children, so she bit her lip and didn't know what to do. After a while, she snorted, "Stop talking." The young man looked at her for a while, then a hand like mutton-fat white jade covered the back of her hand, and said softly, "There will be no children, don't be afraid." As soon as she heard the word child, she couldn't help but blush and instinctively retorted, "I'm not afraid." After the rebuttal, she was stunned, turned sideways and raised her head, and looked at the young man beside her with a vague understanding. Why wouldn't there be? As if he didn't expect that she would ask this, the young man was stunned for a moment, but he quickly reacted and answered her gently, "Because now is not the right time." She nodded and thought for a while, "But if so, I'm not afraid." Her face was no longer so red, but she still felt shy, so she lay on the tea mat with her arms propped up on her pillow, and turned sideways looking at Lian San bit by bit. He pursed his lips slightly. His eyes were so sincere, and his words were so innocent. "If there is a child, I may not take Jingjin, but give birth to the child, and then raise him well until come back to me." After hearing her words, the young man was lost for a moment, looking down at her blankly, with something very deep and distant in his amber eyes. She didn't know what they were, but she just felt that they made his eyes very bright, like many beautiful stars falling deep in the irises, which was so attractive. So she slowly sat up straight and reached out to touch the corner of his eye. The young man woke up and held her hand. He moved her green-white fingers to his lips and kissed her fingertips. "It's my fault," he said. He didn't say what was wrong with him, but she understood what he meant. It was his fault for not being able to give her a grand wedding gift, and he couldn't even stay by her side and have children with her after they got married. But she didn't need a grand wedding ceremony, nor did she long for an ordinary and happy marriage. She blinked her eyes lightly and replied to him seriously, "You're not bad." Then she smiled and shook her wrist, and the bracelet made of silver scales and ruby swayed gently around her wrist, emitting a bright light. "You gave me this, and that's better than anything else." She came close to him and touched his neck with her hand. "Sister Tianbu said that you made this set of jewelry from reverse scales." I was scared. She paused and touched his Adam's apple with her fingers, as if she was afraid of the pain. Like him, he touched it with his fingertips, as light as a feather. "That piece of reverse scale was originally here, right?" The raised Adam's apple moved, and the young man held her hand and moved it to the cartilage under the Adam's apple. "It's here." When her fingertips touched the skin, she trembled, her eyes showing worry. "Does it still hurt?" He shook his head. "It doesn't hurt." But she didn't dare to touch it. She just frowned and worried. Without the protection of Lien, will this place be dangerous? He smiled. "If you want to give me a fatal blow here, you have to get close to me first." There was a hint of joking in his voice. "Other than you, who else in this world can get close to me like this?" Although the words were joking, they comforted her very well. She gently exhaled half a breath, looked at that place for a moment, then suddenly leaned over, put her hands on his shoulders, and pressed her plump lips to his. The skin that had lost the protection of the reverse scales was kissed very softly. His body suddenly stiffened, his right hand pressed on her waist, and his voice was a little unsteady. "Ayu." She looked up at him confusedly. The young man lowered his eyes and met her gaze. "Don't mess with people." She was stunned for a moment, then suddenly understood. Her face suddenly turned red. "I didn't provoke you. Don't think about it." After saying that, she quickly jumped up from his arms, took 2 steps back, pursed her lips, and said to him, made a face, "Brother Lian-san, please meditate, don't keep thinking." Seeing his helplessness, but also as if he was being pleased, he covered his mouth and smiled. "Just meditate here. Let's see how Sister Tianbu and the others are preparing." He took a few steps by himself, but then stepped back, pulled him up, and asked softly, "Forget it, I still don't want to go alone. You come with me." The young man stood up with her and touched her forehead lovingly, clingy. After the mortal ceremony ended, during the month they spent in the little Jiaoqing realm, the two were inseparable and were together almost all the time. In the past 10,000 years, the women around the Third Highness have been like crucian carp crossing the river. Tianbu knows very well how they get along with the Third Highness. The goddesses who entered the Yuanji palace one after another like moths to the flame, each believed that they were special enough to have the charm to turn the prodigal son back and to win the sincerity of this proud and charming His Highness. But in fact, when the goddesses enter Yuanji palace, there is no difference between a flower, a painting, and a jade being collected into the palace. His Highness would only think of them very occasionally. When he thought of them, he would take them out and appreciate them like a painting or a piece of jade. Perhaps when appreciating them, he thought they were beautiful, but his eyes were cold and his mood was indifferent. Tianbu understood that when His Highness was with the goddesses and looked at them, although those beautiful faces were reflected in his eyes, there was nothing in his heart. Seeing their beauty, he also saw their bones, and he would not be moved by it. He would only feel that beauty is easy to pass away, and the way of heaven is like this. Everything flows, life and death are impermanent, and it is desolate and boring. But now, at this moment, when His Highness is with the princess, everything is different. When His Highness looked at the princess, he was definitely not as indifferent as if he were admiring a flower, a painting, or a jade object. His gaze on her was always focused, gentle, and profound. Tianbu couldn't understand what that profound part was, But she felt that when His Highness stared at the princess, it was as if the girl was an innate part of him that could not be separated or lost. In the past, for the Third Highness, there was nothing in this world that he could not lose. He took her so seriously, he listened patiently to every word she said, and he seemed not to be able to get enough of her. He liked every expression of hers and could watch her for a long time. Tianbu remembered that one time the princess fell asleep by the stream. His Highness bent his knees and sat under the pine trees, with the princess resting on his legs. The princess slept for 2 hours, and His Highness looked down at her for 2 hours. He seemed to be trying hard to capture every thought and moment, deliberately carving her image into his eyes and heart. The princess woke up 2 hours later, rubbed her eyes and asked him, "How long have I been asleep?" His Highness reached out and flicked her forehead. It was just a while, not long. Tianbu has never seen His Highness like this. The Nine Heavens goddess never expected that the Third Highness, whom they had been chasing for 10,000 years, who looked romantic but was as distant and unapproachable as the moon in the snow clouds in the sky, would finally walk down the clouds for a mortal. In the end, it was a mortal who won the sincerity of His Highness the Third. They fought for it for 10,000 years, but in the end they lost to a mortal. Who could have expected it? Tianbu didn't feel sorry for those goddesses. Although the princess is just a mortal, she has such a beautiful face, with an innocent and unknowing charm. When she looks up at His Highness, her eyes are full of love and dependence. That's hard not to be impressed by. Mortals often use the words fairy couple to describe the compatibility of a man and a woman. Tianbu felt that His Highness and the princess deserved the title of couple of gods and immortals. But when I think of Zhichangshen's strict attitude towards the love between immortals and mortals, I can't help but feel a little worried about their future. It was probably on the 37th day, in the middle of the night, His Highness the Third Prince felt a burst of spiritual power entering the little Jiaonian realm, shaking the whole small world slightly. The Third Highness of the gods only knows one person who can pour spiritual power into the Shao Jie celestial realm to the point of shaking it, and that is Emperor Donghua of the 13th Heaven Taichen Palace. This spiritual power does not have the intention of attacking, but more like reminding people in the area that a guest is coming from afar. Calculating time, it is indeed time for a Nine Heavens god to lock him down. With the wisdom of the Third Highness, of course, he would not think that Tianjun was so capable that he invited the emperor out of Taichen Palace to run errands. He thought for a moment and guessed that it was the emperor who heard that he had messed up the mortal world and took the initiative. Came out to help him clean up his mess. The emperor seems to be a nosy person, but he grew up in Taichen Palace and saw the emperor much more often than he saw Tianjun. The emperor has already regarded him as half a Taichen Palace person. The emperor will indeed always take care of his affairs. His Highness the Third Highness stood up and put on his outer robe, opened the door, and saw the night rain outside the bamboo building. In the vast night rain, a faint purple light appeared on the horizon. It seemed that the person who came was indeed the emperor, and the emperor was probably waiting at the entrance of the Shao Jie celestial realm in Nanrand ancient tomb. It's time to leave. The young man stared at the purple light in silence for a moment, then closed the door and returned to the bed again. A little light came out of the bed tent. He reached out and lifted the bed curtains. The smell of white chinensis mixed with the fragrance of flowers floats in the tent. It is the smell of extremely private joy. It is entangled, warm and ambiguous, lingering in this inch of heaven and earth. The girl woke up. She was wearing an unseemly middle coat and her long black hair was spread behind her. She sat in the middle of the bed with her arms and legs dazedly, her ankles exposed from the brocade quilt, and a dove-egg-sized luminous pearl slipped by her feet. That's where the dim light in the tent comes from. When she saw him, he looked like he was just waking up from a spring sleep. She tilted her head slightly and complained, "Where have you been?" He answered the question incorrectly. "It's raining outside." She didn't think deeply and unconsciously pulled the quilt closer to her chest, as if to wake up. The quilt was pulled up and more of the feet were exposed, revealing the thin anklet decorated with red lotus flowers. The white skin, the thin silver chain, and the red lotus were so beautiful that the fingerprint on the calf next to the ankle became more and more obvious. His Highness the Third Prince's eyes paused on the fingerprints. The girl looked down and saw the mark. She was stunned for a moment and touched it herself. There is a mark," she whispered. After caressing the young man twice, she looked at the young man. There were still light pink marks on his cheeks pressed by the brocade pillow, and the bright red on his lips had not faded away. They looked like a blooming flower and a plum heart. But her expression and eyes were extremely pure. "But it doesn't hurt. My skin is a bit delicate, and it tends to leave marks if I use a little force, but it actually doesn't hurt at all." There was a bit of waxiness in his voice and a bit of hoarseness. The young man sat down on the edge of the bed, held her calf and rubbed it, then put it back into the brocade quilt. "I will be careful next time." She innocently commented, "Well, just be careful and you'll be fine." Hearing her hoarse voice and childish words, he felt funny and distressed at the same time. He touched her forehead and said, "Would you like a drink of water?" He wanted to get up and pour her some water. She put her hand softly on his wrist and stopped him without using any force. "Don't drink the water." "Okay." He sat back, hugged her, took her to lie on the brocade pillow, and stroked the shallow mark on her cheek. "Then sleep a little longer. It's still early before dawn." She didn't close her eyes immediately. She held his clothes with her fingers and buried her head in his arms. After being depressed for a while, she raised her head again and said, "You will leave when I fall asleep, right?" He froze. The night pearl rolled into the bed and was covered by the gauze curtain, and the light became faint. In the bright and faint light, the girl's expression was very calm. Seeing that he was silent for a long time, a thin layer of mist gradually appeared in her eyes. As if she noticed the existence of the wetness, she immediately lowered her eyes. When I raised my eyes again, the mist had disappeared. "I'm not sad." She spoke softly, held his hand, put her cheek against the palm, and looked into his eyes as if to persuade him to believe. "Don't worry." She pretended to be calm, but her eyes were full of sadness, and she wanted to tell him that she was not sad and asked him not to worry. The way she looked made his heart hurt and soften. He looked at her, and as she held her wrist, he stroked her lightly scarred cheek again. "Don't be so pushy." She lowered her eyes and was quiet for a while, then suddenly said, "That night when we were stationed at Kaisha River, Prince Minda set off fireworks for me across the bank." His hands paused and his eyebrows frowned slightly. She raised her eyes and saw his appearance. She was startled for a moment and suddenly smiled. She touched his eyebrows with her fingers and gently stroked his brows. "This makes me unhappy. You don't even know what I'm going to say." He pinched her cheek. "Then what do you want to say?" Like a little fish, she meekly curled up into his arms, stayed close to him, and said softly, "Looking at the fireworks at that time, I thought that I would never see Brother Lian San again in this life. It was really sad. Sad." She raised her head and looked at him. "It's better now than then. It's just a short separation. I won't find it unbearable." She said such sincere words in an ordinary tone, which was shocking, but she was still ignorant, naive, and pure and passionate. He couldn't help but kiss her lips, and she wrapped her arms around his neck and responded submissively. The sound of cold rain outside the window. The night was very deep and heavy. Chinyu didn't know when he fell asleep. Therefore, he didn't know that the young man looked at her for a long time after she fell asleep. Then, when the whole little Gileo realm was shaking gently again, the young man got out of bed, put on his coat, and put on his cloud boots. He looked back at her for the last time, tucked her in the quilt, then opened the door and walked in without looking back. In the pattering night rain. When she woke up again, it was broad daylight, and there was no one else in the room. She didn't try to confirm whether the young man had really left. She just stared at the ceiling of the tent, lay there in a daze for a while, then sat up as if nothing had happened and started dressing one by one. Auspicious clouds are lingering, auspicious cranes are roaring. This is the ninth heaven. There is no peace in the 9 heavens today. First, the Tangqi god Lord, who was in charge of the world's rivers and mountains, hurriedly went up to heaven to meet the saints. He didn't know what important matter he reported, so the Heavenly Lord issued an urgent edict, ordering the gods to go to the Lingxiao Palace to discuss the matter. The gate of Lingxiao Palace was closed tightly, and after discussing the matter for about an hour, the emperor, who had just come out of seclusion in the Yangshu Pavilion of Taichan Palace, arrived at the palace. I don't know what happened next. The gods were waiting in the temple, but the emperor came out. He didn't go back for 13 days, but went straight out of Nanshanmen. The little immortals who were on duty near Nanshanmen were excited when they first saw the emperor's appearance. After the excitement were over, they remembered that according to past experience, if the emperor left Nanshanmen, it would most likely be to solve major issues that endanger the stability of the 8 wastelands. The fairies didn't know what was going on, and they couldn't help but tremble as they didn't know what kind of disaster was coming to Bahuang. Later, it came out from nowhere that the emperor left the Nanshanmen because His Highness the Third Prince, who entered the mortal world to protect the Red Lotus Fairy a few days ago, split the earth and created the sea in the mortal world where he was for unknown reasons, and tamed him again. The 4 sacred beasts that guarded the world completely changed the destiny pattern of that mortal world. This move violated the laws of the 9 heavens and required punishment. Therefore, the Heavenly Lord entrusted the emperor to go down to the lower realm to arrest the Third Highness to come back and be punished. This matter has nothing to do with Bahuang Anwen. Everyone felt relieved. The perspective of the immortals looking at the problem is very different from that of the gods in the Lingxiao Palace. After the immortals learned that His Highness split the earth and created the sea in the mortal world, they all felt that His Highness was able to reshape the laws of the mortal world at such a young age. He was worthy of being the first among the immortals of his generation, and they admired him deeply. Regarding the fact that he casually changed the destiny of the mortal world, everyone did not think there was anything wrong except that His Highness was really awesome. Of course, everyone also keenly grasped the key point of, the Emperor personally went down to the realm to arrest His Highness. The Emperor personally went down to the realm to arrest His Highness, which means that the 2 of them will pass by Nanshanmen together later. How rare it is to see the Emperor and His Highness at the Nanshanmen at the same time. This is simply a grand event. Because the ideas of the immortals were so strange, within half an hour, the usually sparsely populated Nanshanmen became the busiest place in the entire Zhuzangshan. The little gods, who usually had no chance to see the 2 great gods, but dreamed of seeing the true appearance of the Emperor and the Third Highness, crowded every corner near Nanshanmen. Among them, female fairies are the main ones. The gods held a meeting in the Lingxiao Palace, and the immortals held a small meeting near the Nantian Gate. A female fairy gave a popular science guide to a little fairy who had just ascended a few days ago. As you can see from the picture album, all the ancient gods are very good-looking, and the emperor is the best among them. I heard that the emperor's true appearance is better than he is more than 100 times more handsome in his portrait. You are lucky to be able to see the true face of the emperor just a few days after your ascension. You must know that I have been working as an errand in the Tiangong for 7,000 years, and this is the first time I have encountered such an opportunity. Xiao Sen raised his head and looked towards Nanshanmen, but my sister has always seen His Highness the Third, but I haven't even seen His Highness the Third. The female fairy nodded with a bright face. I have met His Highness the Third Highness many times, and he is also very handsome. Legend has it that since His Highness was a baby, he was the most beautiful baby in the world, and later became the most beautiful among his peers. Good-looking children, the best-looking young men, it has been a good journey until now. Turning to Xiao Sen, His Third Highness went out on behalf of the Celestial Clan for the first time. He sat on a cloud throne in front of the Shiliang River and accepted the surrender of the Demon Clan. Have you seen the painting in the book? It is said that many goddesses fell into the trap of His Highness the Third Prince because of seeing that painting. The little fairy was originally a mortal who practiced for dozens of lives. In her last life, she ascended as a Taoist nun. She was young when she ascended. She was a small piece of wood who was heartbroken. She asked the fairy blankly, "What does it mean to fall into the trap?" The female fairy came over mysteriously and whispered, "It is said that it is difficult not to fall in love with His Highness when you see him like that. This is a trap." She sighed softly. "It's a pity that Your Highness is just a flower in the mirror. A moon in the water." Xiao Sen didn't quite understand. Flowers in the mirror, moon in the water? The female fairy was surprised. "You haven't heard of His Highness's romantic reputation, have you?" She smiled and said, "Your Highness is romantic." There are many goddesses who love His Highness. There are bold goddesses who will take the initiative to pursue His Highness. His Highness will generally not refuse, but His Highness is also ruthless, and the goddesses never stay by his side for more than 5 months. But the harder it is to conquer his heart, the more the goddesses come one after another, and His Highness is always welcome. Everyone seems to have His Highness briefly. It's possible, but that kind of possession is illusory and ethereal, like chasing a flower in the mirror and the moon in the water. Do you understand? Xiao Xian was confused. "I heard 2 sisters talking about the demon-locking tower that day. Doesn't it mean that the third highness also has someone he really likes, that is Fairy Tangqi?" Xiao Sen reasoned very logically. Since His Highness already has someone he loves, why do those goddesses still think that they have the possibility of having the third highness? At this point, he seemed to have realized himself, "Hey, this time His Highness is in the mortal world. Sure made such a big move. Is it just for Fairy Tangqi?" The female fairy immediately stopped laughing, and her expression became cold. "Oh, so you're on the side of His Highness the Third Highness and Fairy Tangqi? I am not from this genre. I am from the genre of, the more ruthless the 3 highnesses play Bahuang, the more touching it is. I don't believe that His Highness and Fairy Tangqi really have anything to do with each other. It seems that we two have no common language." After saying that, he took 3 steps back and distanced himself from Xiao Sen. Xiao Sen was ignorant and couldn't understand why Zhi Changshan could even organize such a thing. She deeply felt that she was too earthy and was incompatible with this trendy Tiangong, and she was eager to win back the same girl. Seeing the friendship of immortals, he quickly shook his head. I don't have it, I don't understand anything, I'm all nonsense, sister, don't ignore me." There was a buzz among the crowd, and discussions like this were endless. Since there were no powerful gods to restrain them, everyone was a little lethargic, gossiping excitedly and waiting excitedly for the arrival of the Emperor and His Highness. Also happy and harmonious. After a while, the purple-clothed deity pressed his head and appeared at Nanshanmen again, followed by a white-clothed deity. Both of them are extremely tall, and their faces are also solemn and handsome. The immortals crowded nearby took the opportunity to take a look, but did not dare to look more. They all bowed down and bowed. The Emperor and His Highness ignored the little gods kneeling on the ground and went straight in. The immortals did not dare to raise their heads and respectfully sent the Emperor and His Highness off, but the blessing of these 2 eyes was enough for everyone to feel satisfied. As soon as these 2 people entered the Nantian Gate, an immortal followed them and followed them almost at a trot, catching up with the Emperor and His Highness the Third Highness. The immortals did not dare to raise their heads when they heard the footsteps. On the other hand, His Highness the Third Highness looked back at the visitor and raised his eyebrows slightly. "Second brother." The second prince, Tangqi, stood in front of the 2 of them. He bowed to the Emperor first, and then turned to Lian Song. "I have heard about what you did in the mortal world. Are you doing this for Chang'e?" He paused. After a pause, a trace of sadness appeared on his face. I'm sorry, Chang'e. Since you are going to be punished for Chang'e, I have nothing else to do. I only want to meet my father with you." The Emperor didn't like to meddle in other people's business. After listening to Tangqi say a word or 2, he stood aside, leaving him alone to say a few words. Liansong heard this and understood. "Second brother is planning to intercede for me in front of my father because of Chang'e?" He said lightly, "That's not necessary." Tangqi was surprised. "Why?" "Because I'm not doing it for her." Tangqi frowned, and his face slowly changed as his mind raced. "You changed your mind?" He was stunned. "What about Chang'e?" "Chang'e, won't she never be able to return to heaven again?" The young man in white looked indifferent. Although my second brother is not in Zhechangshan, he is very familiar with the bet between my father and I. Tangqi's face turned pale. Why you came to Earth alone is not a top secret. He couldn't help but said anxiously, where do you plan to put Tangqi like this? The young man looked at him with no expression on his face, but his eyes felt that he was ridiculous. I have never had feelings for Tangqi, so how can I change my heart? The Tangqi of today is no longer the Tangqi of the past. Let her fall into her body. Being reincarnated as a mortal forever is a good destination. Tangqi looked at the young man in disbelief. Because you protect Tangqi, I have always felt at ease, but now you. He hesitated. What do you think of Tangqi? The young man frowned as if he was troubled. Second brother doesn't understand my affairs, and there is no need to understand my affairs. When the demon locking tower collapsed, I wanted Tangqi to be alive, and it was not for the reason that second brother thought. Tangqi, she is an immortal or immortal, and it has never been any different to me. It's just that when I had the luxury to help her become an immortal, I would help her, but now I don't have the luxury anymore. After saying this, he turned to the stunned Tangqi. Nodding, second brother, if you don't have any other advice, I'll take my leave now. Tangqi was stunned in that place for a long time, unable to regain his senses. 28 years ago, Tangqi died because of him. It wasn't that he didn't blame himself or feel guilty, but later on, his younger brother Liansong was far better at Tangqi than him, so he felt relieved. The younger brother likes Tangqi and will try his best to revive her and make her return to the immortal class. This makes him relieved, and his guilt are relieved. But today, his younger brother told him that he was not helping Tangqi out of personal affection, and he no longer felt that making her an immortal was something that had to be achieved. It would be good for her to remain immortal forever. Let Tangqi completely become immortal, enter reincarnation forever, and never be able to return to the ninth heaven. Tangqi's heart felt a dull pain. How is this possible? But what should he do? A wave of confusion and helplessness gripped the second prince deeply, making it difficult for him to move. When His Highness the Second and His Highness the Third were talking, the fairies were not very close, so naturally they could not hear any words exchanged between them. In fact, among all the immortals present, only the little immortal who had ascended as a little Taoist nun secretly raised his head and glanced at them while the second and third highnesses were talking. From her perspective, she could only see the backs of the Emperor and His Highness, but she could see the face of His Highness the Third. The face of His Highness the Third Highness is so handsome that it is truly unforgettable. But with the same reputation as a romantic, His Highness was completely different from the suave romantic young masters she had seen in the mortal world. He didn't have a gentle look on his face, nor could he show any understanding. When talking to others, his face was extremely cold and indifferent, completely inaccessible and even a bit scary. After the Emperor and the Third Highness left, Xiaosen couldn't hold it back anymore and asked the female fairy beside him a question. Why does it seem so difficult to get close to the Third Highness? There are so many goddesses who challenge the difficult level and pursue him so hard. The female fairy is worthy of being a senior supporter of His Highness. That's the way you have never seen His Highness when he smiles. His Highness smiles, that's really it. She clicked her tongue twice. No one can resist His Highness's smile. Probably those goddesses want His Highness to smile at them, so they should chase after him no matter how difficult it is. Xiaosen seemed to understand, but she felt that she had learned a lot today. It wasn't until His Highness the Second Highness also left Nanshanmen that the kneeling immortals got up from the ground one after another, rubbed their knees, and dispersed in twos and threes with satisfaction, making Nanshanmen return to its usual purity. Shortly after that, the discussion in Lingxiao Palace finally came to an end. The gods who participated in the meeting recalled the twists and turns of the day and did not know what to say. When the Emperor went down to arrest the Third Highness, the Heavenly Lord also sent the Tangqi Lord down to find out the reason why the Third Highness created the sea. Tangqi Divine Lord came back before the Emperor. His Highness Dao San did this for a stunning mortal woman. At that time, Tianjuan's face was not very good-looking. Soon the Emperor brought the third prince back. In the main hall, the emperor questioned the third prince and allowed him to defend himself. The answer given by the third prince was consistent with what Lord Tangqi had found out. He said that he had fallen in love with a mortal woman, but that woman insisted on marrying someone else, which made him very angry, so he split the earth and created a sea, geographically separating the two places. The kingdom of a woman and her fiancé makes the woman want to marry but cannot. What he did was a fool's errand, and he regretted it after returning to his senses, but it was okay to do it, and regretting it would not help, so he was willing to come back and accept the punishment. This is indeed something that the Third Highness, who is used to being wanton, can do. Tianjun was so angry that he could not speak. He hated him for being like this, but because he loved his youngest son in his heart, he was not willing to punish him severely. Fortunately, His Highness the Third Highness is very popular, and the gods are also able to look at his eyes, and they all begged for mercy. In particular, even the emperor spoke up, saying that although His Highness the Third Highness split the earth and created the sea, changing the rules of the world, causing changes in the fate of the country and the fate of people, fortunately it was not something harmful to nature, and the three countries were separated and stopped many wars, which made the mortal world more peaceful. It just made Nando Dio and Hades have to spend more time to re-deal with the fate of the country and the people there. Furthermore, in order to prevent future gods from following the example of the third prince and casually changing the fate of people and the country in the mortal world, he will add a rule for billions of mortals, the 4 tribes of gods. Devils and demons enter the mortal world, and if they do anything in the mortal world, all techniques will be counterattacked by the techniques used. This is safe. The emperor is worthy of being the co-owner of heaven and earth who once governed the people of the 6 realms properly. Even if he is partial, he is so partial that people have nothing to criticize and nothing to say. If he has any dissatisfaction, he can only hold it in and only hate himself. Why can't he please the emperor like the third prince? He is the emperor's favorite, and he will take care of any trouble he gets into. Finally, the Heavenly Lord issued an imperial order and punished His Highness the Third Prince by being beaten by cold waterfalls and icy water for 7 days in the Tangqi Mountain in the North Pole. This incident ended with thunder and rain. Arctic Tangqi Mountain is close to the North Sea and is covered with ice and snow all year round. It has 7 peaks. The second peak is hung with a waterfall. The mountains and waters rush down from the top of the peak and go straight into the cold pool at the bottom of the valley. In the cold pool, there is a huge stone, which is the place where the immortals and gods were punished by being struck by the ice waterfall. The immortal stood on it, and the coldest water in the world that fell from the top of the 1,000-foot peak hit his body, which was like a cold blade initiation. The immortal had to endure this pain while chanting sutras and reflecting on himself. Emperor Donghua stood on the top of the third peak next door. The third peak was a little shorter than the second peak. The emperor looked at the waterfall hanging on the cliff of the second peak for a while and commented, "Although the waterfall is fast, it is still much gentler than the whirlpool at the bottom of the Zheni abyss. You at the age of 20,000, you can stay in that whirlpool for a month without any injuries. Staying in this waterfall for 7 days shouldn't be a problem." He raised his hand and transformed into a chess table. "It's still early for you to be tortured. Play a game of chess with me first." His Highness the Third Prince also looked at the waterfall for a while and was silent. "When I went to Zhen'ayuan to get the Xian iron fan, my hands were not trapped. Even if I fell into the whirlpool at the bottom of the abyss, I could still save myself with my hands. But in being tortured in the cold pool, my hands seemed to be bound by iron chains." The emperor was already sitting at the chess table and holding the white piece. "That's right." He nodded. "Then be careful." After thinking about it, he added, "It should hurt, but you won't die. Don't afraid. Let's play chess first." His Highness was speechless. The Third Highness went to the North Pole Tangqi Mountain to be tortured. Tianjun didn't come, but the emperor came with him. Although everyone in the 9 heavens knew that His Highness the Third Highness was the emperor's favorite, this was a little too favored. If the emperor had not been merciful with women for more than 300,000 years, the 9 Heavens immortals would have suspected that the Third Highness was actually not the Emperor's biological son, but rather the Emperor's biological son. The Emperor was by his side, and the 2 generals who escorted the Third Highness here did not dare to neglect. After arriving at the destination, they stood at a distance and allowed the Emperor to say a few private words to His Highness before the execution. However, they saw the Emperor and His Highness. Suddenly, he started playing chess. The 2 generals didn't know what was going on, so they looked at each other for a while, then tentatively approached, just in time to hear the Emperor say, "What's going on between you and that mortal woman?" The 2 generals were startled, and when they wanted to listen again, they saw His Highness raise his head and glance at them lightly, and then the 2 of them were separated from the silence technique and could not hear anything. The 2 of them didn't dare to get any closer, looked at each other, and both retreated to where they were standing. When the Emperor asked that sentence, Liansong Jihei's hand paused. He spent half of his 40,000 years in the presence of Emperor Donghua. The Emperor was both a teacher and a friend to him. All the 9 heavenly immortals and gods felt that the Emperor was difficult to understand. The Emperor was indeed difficult to understand, but he felt that the Emperor was not that difficult to understand. For example, at this time, the Emperor should also really want to play chess with him, but it is not just to play chess with him. Sure enough, he heard the Emperor's question before he took 2 steps. The Emperor also added, "Don't fool me the same way you fooled your father." He calmly said, "I had no intention of fooling the Emperor." He said in a calm voice, "I am serious about her. When the punishment is over, I will go to the mortal world to find her, help her become an immortal, and stay with me forever." As a fairy couple, the Emperor has lived for more than 300,000 years and has experienced a lot. He was not surprised when he heard his words. He only said, "It is rare to hear the word serious from your mouth." It was like a casual question. Why are you so obsessed with a mortal? Isn't she also a kind of empty? The young man was quiet for a moment. I can let go of other Kongs, but I can't let go of her. The Emperor raised his eyes and looked at the young man for a while. He seemed to be going to the side to get the teacup out of habit. When he didn't get it, he remembered that the tea set had not yet been melted. He raised his hand and flicked out a complete set of black pottery tea sets and said slowly, "When you become an adult, talk to me about the Dharma," sighing that everything in the world is impermanent and everything goes through life and death, which is very boring. Ask me if there is nothing eternal in the world, and there is nothing that will never change. What is the purpose of the 5 races of beings who are so busy? Meaning? After all, just one word, change, can turn all their efforts into smoke. The silver-haired god walked smoothly to get some heavenly water to make tea. At that time, gave me 2 examples. For example, those who love power are like the celestial clan. They have been working for thousands of years to get a high position, but they only make 2 or 3 mistakes and are eliminated. Digging into the dust, all the past hard work is nothing. What's the point? Another example is those who love beauty. They are demons. They try their best to get a beauty, but only have to wait for hundreds of thousands of years before they have to face the twilight of beauty. The past, what's the point if all your thoughts are wasted? The young man nodded. I remember. That was the first time after Tianjun expressed his intention to make me the war god who protects the clan. I went to Taichung Palace to talk to the Emperor about mysteries. Yes, the pottery pot gurgled with water, and the Emperor focused his attention back on the chessboard. You said that the Emperor wanted you to be the guardian war god to protect the peace of the heavenly clan and protect Chang'an in the 8 wastelands. But if all living things in the world are living such a meaningless life, you can't find the meaning of protecting them. The Emperor gave birth to a child. At that time, I asked you, what is meaningful to you? You said, not empty is meaningful. If there is something in this world worthy of your desperate pursuit and cherish without hesitation, it must be a constant thing, so those pursuits and cherishes will not be like flowers in the mirror. The Emperor raised his eyes and looked at him, as if out of curiosity, but that mortal is also a kind of empty. Now that you are that mortal, you can be said to have put all your efforts and have no hesitation. According to your belief, what is the meaning of pursuing and cherishing it? Woolen cloth. The young man clung to the chess piece and did not make a move for a long time. Finally, he held the black piece in his hand and closed his eyes slightly, as if conflicted and tired. Actually, I haven't thought about empty and non-empty for a long time. Maybe I haven't thought about the meaning of the existence of things in this world for a long time. He paused for a moment. Indeed, according to my belief, she, I, and everything in this world are a kind of emptiness. For all things in this world, in the past, I treat everyone equally, whether they are happy or suffering. There is no ripple in my heart, but for her. He did not continue. After the water was boiled, the emperor continued his words while making tea. To be indifferent to everything in the world, including yourself, is the innate divinity of the water god. In fact, there is nothing wrong with it. It's just that in the past you can only see empty, and being attached to empty is a bit too much. The emperor unhurriedly poured the first pot of tea soup into the warm cup. The Buddha in the Western Brahma realm teaches the Dharma to the 5 races of living beings. For the living beings who can only see the real things and are attached to the real things, he will teach them the Dharma. Explain emptiness and make them understand emptiness because they are too attached to being. And I keep telling you about being because you are too attached to emptiness. Obsession with being can easily cause worries and attachments. Obsessing with emptiness can easily hinder a god from saving oneself and saving others. For example, if you were unwilling to be a god general who protects your clan before, it is because of this kind of attachment. No, you are like this now. The emperor gave him a cup of tea. In my opinion, you are much better than before. The young man was silent for a moment, but even if I no longer cling to emptiness, I still can't save people. He rubbed the sunspot in his hand, and finally dropped it in a corner away from the killing force. It violates the law of the 9 heavens and takes a mortal as his wife. The God clan cannot tolerate this, but I insist on doing so the God clan will not tolerate me. So, he looked at the deity in front of him with clear eyes. I can't be the war god who protects the clan and helps save others. For the rest of my life, in the long journey to immortality, I can only protect one person, and I will probably disappoint the emperor. In just 2 sentences, the choice and future plans are clear. The emperor didn't care. It's Tianjun who is disappointed. Why should I be disappointed? The pottery cup in his hand shook slightly, as if he was remembering the long past. Back then, Mo Yuan also ran away to live in seclusion because of Shaowan. I didn't stop him then, and I certainly won't stop you now. She raised her eyes and glanced at him. It's rare that you are so serious, and you just do whatever you want to do. The young man nodded yes, because he had just made a bad move that was very symbolic to their conversation, but not conducive to the victory of the whole game. At this time, he had to devote himself to making repairs. After demolishing the east wall and repairing the west wall, suddenly remembered another important thing. Since the emperor also knows that I must leave the god clan, then the affairs of the god ancestral god can only be handed over to the emperor. The emperor had obviously expected this and sneered calmly. You said it as if you wouldn't blame this matter on me if you stayed in the god clan. The young man did not shirk. I will definitely pass it on to you, because this matter really has nothing to do with me. The emperor took a sip of tea and said coldly, Did you know that you and God Zhu are actually related? The young man made a move on his own and said really, but he didn't believe it when he heard the voice. The emperor put down the teacup and said, The silent flute that Shaowan left for you is actually the magical instrument that Zhu made for her. The young man finally raised his head. What? The emperor recalled for a while. When Shaowan gave me the flute, he left a message asking me to give it to the water god in the new god era. He said that the water god was related to Zhu and she had nothing else to give to the water god, so she gave it to the water god. Give him the magic weapon. The young man looked at the emperor's expression doubtfully for a while, and then asked doubtfully, Then what is the connection between me and the ancestor god? After all, it happened more than 200,000 years ago. The emperor continued to recall for a while. She didn't seem to say anything, said. The young man paused for a moment. The emperor didn't ask? The emperor responded to him matter-of-factly. It has nothing to do with me. Why should I ask? The young man was speechless, but he had to admit that it was indeed the case. That's true. The emperor glanced at him. Don't you have any ideas about this matter? The young man was silent for a moment. The silent flute is very useful. God Sudi made it and God Shawan gave it to me, so thank them. The emperor nodded. Well, if Sudi is really resurrected, I will help you convey your gratitude the next time I see her. There was a snowstorm on the ice field on the peak. Seeing that the execution time was coming, the purple-clothed god and the white-clothed god were still chatting and playing chess indifferently. Especially His Highness III, who didn't look like he was about to be tortured. The two executioners were waiting far away, intending to remind the Third Highness, but they did not dare to come forward and disturb the emperor's mood. They could only look at each other with big eyes and small eyes, wondering why this errand was so painful. End of Lotus Step Chapter 31. Book 2.